Let's start with the keynote, Enabling Big Data and Computing Outcomes for Australia Science. We have Kelsey Druken, who's the Data Collections Manager who manages the pay-to-scale data repository at NCI. Kelsey, welcome. How are you today?
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for your time and for listening today.
Absolutely.
Sorry, one moment, and I'll just get the screen shared. Great. All right.
Excellent.
Well, thank you again. I'll just start out again. I'm from NCI, the National Computational Infrastructure here in Canberra, in Australia. I manage the reference data collection, so I'll be giving a bit of an overview of the activities and what we do at NCI. But I'll just note my area, and some of the things I'll focus on more specifically will be around data, in particular for the context here today. To start out, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land which I come to today, which is the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to the elder past and present. And before you here on the screen is our beautiful artwork for our new HPC machine Gaudi, which is just beautiful. And below, I have some information here on the artist and the meaning of this beautiful artwork, which Gaudi is to search for in the Ngunnawal language. So to start, NCI, who are we? What do we do? So we are a supercomputer and data services center. So here in Australia, we provide HPC services, cloud computing, national reference data collections, which is my area, as well as data services that underpin and weave through many of these different components. We support over 5,000 Australian researchers and enable research that informs policy with outcomes that have national benefits. And this is a picture here of our lovely building in Canberra that we cannot access at the moment. So we're all in lockdown here in the ACT. So this is where many of us reside in normal times. And for those that might be listening in that are not local to the area, so Canberra here with the star, that's where we're based. All right, so for our work at NCI, many, why is it important? So listed here, many of the, common reasons that you use HPC technology or facilities for research will come as no surprise to, I'm sure, many listening. But obviously, there's a large range of situations where HPC, AI, and additional tools and the growing data analysis world, many of these things come and play a big part in the work done at NCI. And this includes, things that are too small, the too large, the too short, the too long, too expensive, and of course the too dangerous that you can't go and test in person. At NCI, we are funded directly by the Australian government through the Department of Education, in particular the National Research Infrastructure for Australia, so NCRIS, the Australian Research Council, and we've been largely supported by foundation collaborators since 2007 here. So this includes the Australian National University, where we reside, the Australian Government Bureau of Meteorology, Australian Government Geoscience Australia, and CSIRO. So these are all our foundation collaborators that support much of the work we do. The spectrum of science, so just to give an idea of the range, we have fundamental, strategic, applied, and industry work going on our systems. And this, you can see a broad range of physics, chemistry, math, astronomy within our fundamental type of work, up to many industry-specific and applied situations. And when we think of the context of HPC and AI, many of these areas are big, growing frontiers for this, for work. So how does NCI enhance Australian research? Just a few stats here on our new lovely machine, Australia's fastest research computer. So we have 9.26 petaflops. So I'm reading the stats here. So this is not my area. So apologies in advance to my colleagues that might be listening if I butcher any of these numbers. But you can see where our new machine sits at the moment. And we have over 3,000 CPUs, 160 GPU nodes, with some additional stats here for any that are interested in those details. So data co-location. So this gets closer to the area that myself and team work closely with. So we have fast file systems that sit co-located with our HPC as well as our cloud and data services technologies. And this stores 50 plus petabytes, much of which is managed under our reference data collections. So one nice little comparison here is over 800 years of Netflix, if you'd like to convert to that analogy. Storage is available to researchers using Gaudi via 100 gigabit per second network links. So to give a sense of that, that's 1,000 times faster than top tier residential NVN services. And this is unique for Australia. This setup enables researchers to perform, what would otherwise be impossible, especially with personal workstation setups. So just a little bit about the area where my team and I focus. So we manage reference data sets that are brought together at NCI, particularly from many of our foundation collaborators and university researchers. So these are brought together within our high performance environment for both computation and data analysis. And this is to make data that is for reference and reuse more broadly available to the community. And so this sits co-located again with our HPC and cloud, et cetera, systems, and underpins then, the exciting and new research that our users are doing every day. And in the context of HPC and AI, the co-location of managed referenceable data is more important than ever, really. So you want data that you can trust, that can be available on demand. So if we thought of that Netflix analogy again, this is your library of options to work with on our system. So the combinations are endless. And some core principles for us is that, of course, we want this data to be managed in a fair way. So for those that might be familiar, fair data, there are some fundamental components of that to be findable, accessible, ideally as interoperable as possible, and reusable. So those are very core to our data management. And we also want to make sure that our data is available to be cited, so that impact and value is as visible as possible. And of course, data transparency is also a really important one for us. So, and this again, when we think in the context of HPC and AI, if you are building workflows and doing, the next big thing, you want to make sure that the data or dependencies that are underpinning that work can be trusted, or that you can at least trace back any changes, so change management to data that might go into these workflows and research. So that's really important for us to have processes around that. So just for the next few minutes here, we have a few use cases and work that goes on at NCI that we'd like to highlight. So the first here is an example of enabling time-critical research for COVID-19 treatment. So timely. So Gaudi supports Australian research groups investigating COVID-19. And this work We have researchers simulating protein structures, human cell receptors, future potential pandemics. And NCI was able to provide 40 million compute hours at very short notice for this work. And you can see here a quote from Professor Megan O'Mara from the ANU, that NCI's new Gaudi supercomputer is the only supercomputer in the Southern Hemisphere powerful enough to do these simulations. So what a flattering testament to the resourcing that was available to do this work. Supporting climate research nationally and internationally. So CMIP 6 is a multi-petabyte climate modeling data collection that we host here. So this is one that's very close to my team's work. So we host data both from Australian research as well as international researchers that are critical to the climate research and IPCC reports. And we put a lot of work both into the data management and data services, as well as the resource for our users at NCI to be able to work with this data and also have access to the international data. It's also one that is a big effort and body of work for us to stay in sync and coordinate with our international nodes across the globe for this big replica collection. So NCI is the only facility of its kind in Australia that can support this, the scale of a collection, which has been really a joy to be a part of, particularly from my team's end. And another nice quote and feedback from one of our big users, Dr. Simon Marsland at CSIRO. CMIP 6 is the most comprehensive suite of climate science experiments ever conceived. We hammer the NCI peak system. Gaudi is a credit to Australia. Another particular use case here, this time coming from industry. So DHI, reducing the risk of ship grounding in real time. This is an example of global not-for-profit water and maritime engineering. So DHI using NCI to model currents and waves to understand the risks of ships coming aground on the Australian coast. Ships going aground often cause a lot of damage, have the potential to create oil spills, and are expensive to rescue. So this work with the Australian Maritime Safety is trying to help understand where the risk of ships going aground is greatest, and the needs to forecast what waves and currents are doing in the ocean at a continental scale requires an enormous amount of compute. So this is another example of NCI in partnership here with DHI. Protecting lives and property from extreme bushfire. UNSW researchers have used Gaudi to discover unknown mode of fire propagation. Simulations were derived from existing data. So in this case, the 2003 Canberra bushfires, numerical weather prediction models, and computational fluid dynamic models. Research into bushfire behavior may aid communities and firefighters during catastrophic fire conditions. And this research could not have been completed within a reasonable timeframe without Gaudi, our supercomputer, which is really great to see. And here we have another nice quote with the facilities and support at NCI are critically important for the core research of their group. So that's another example there with bushfires. Genomic data is another area that's really growing for many of the work and interactions at NCI. And in this particular case here, we're highlighting the Garvin Institute of Medical Research and their use of reprocessing human genomes on our systems. This includes 4,000 anonymous genomic samples of healthy seniors that were stored at NCI as part of the Medical Genome Reference Bank. And in fact, the Medical Genome Reference Bank is a soon-to-be reference collection that will be available for users that have been granted approval through Garvin to use on our systems for work. So that's something exciting coming up in the near future here. In this case, there were 4,000 samples that could easily be processed at NCI. And it needed further to further refine the sample and to produce more accurate representation of a healthy human. And in this case, the MGRB can be compared against the sequenced genome samples of those seeking treatment. So that was a very interesting use case. And you can see here, Dr. Dan Andrews aligning that many genomes in one night is a clear demonstration of MIGHT, the NCI computational capacity that couldn't have been done elsewhere in Australia. And so just lastly, to wrap up here before I think there'll be time for Q&A, just a little breakdown of the type of users we have at NCI for our HPC use. So you can see here we have a large portion of university users, but then also the core foundation collaborators that I mentioned earlier. So the Bureau of Meteorology, CSIRO, Geoscience Australia, to name a few. And then we also have a portion as merit flagships and then other research centers. And then how does NCI support its user community? So we have quite a few different activities going on now, especially tailored to some of our COVID lockdown lives, but we have in-person training events that are now offered online, so through Zoom, etc. Extensive technical documentation available on both our main website as well as our documentation pages, and user support services to assist our users, of course. And we have a great wide range of staff with many specialties that span quite a few domains that have underpinned all of the amazing stories and use cases that you've heard here today. So with that, I might leave with the picture of what might Australian HPC beyond 2021 look like as a question mark, and also some information here for NCI, our support email, and information pages. So with that, I'll just say a big thank you to all of my colleagues at NCI, as well as the hosts of today and all of you listening. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Kelsey. I do have a couple questions for you. Before I start that, I just wanted to remind everyone that you can ask questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom, or you can send us chat. We can monitor both, but I'd prefer Q&A. That's just me. So let's go ahead and start with the first question here. It's from Paul. Hi, Kelsey. Could you explain how the colocation of data helps research that uses high performance computing?
Thanks, Paul. I mean, I think there are many advantages. I think the biggest is the availability. So, and the avoiding of duplication, as well as the confidence, for users to be able to know where data sits and that they can come back or trace through information what they've used in their work. And I think that's a problem that continually becomes complex and is growing. So the more trust that you can have on something that's available and co-located and then well managed and documented is really becoming critical as more and more data is produced and more data becomes about dependency in the wonderful research that's going on today in all fields.
Okay, great. And our next question, it's from an anonymous attendee. It says, what type of media do you use to back up your 50 petabytes of storage?
Good question, and a little outside my area. But I will say, I believe that there's not a full backup of all data on our system. So there's a bit of a tiered a tiered approach to some content that may have a backup form on another type of media. For our reference collections, for example, we do not have the archive version, so our providers provide a copy that NCI makes available for the work, but that isn't the same as that archive copy in terms of the reference material.
Okay, and the next question is from Alberto. It says, are there any ad hoc resources devoted to visualization in NCI, say a dedicated HPC cluster with GPUs? And thanks for your talk.
No problem, Alberto. Very good question. And I think the best place to direct that to might be our help at NCI. I think we have a few materials that are helpful to get started. And then also there are people that could talk more in depth through our help desk support.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey. So we do have some time. So why don't I just throw it up to our illustrious panel of speakers for today. If they happen to have any questions, they'd like to jump on and ask Kelsey. Okay, we do have one more that just came in. Stephen says, great presentation. What an awesome facility. I work for Chevron Australia. We run 2 complex facilities, read IoT monster data assets in the most remote parts of the world, including Barrow Island, a Class A nature reserve where we have significant environmental stewardship responsibilities. Much of the work you've described might be applicable to our needs as we look to maximize the value and potential of our digital twins of these assets. Do you offer industry support so we can benefit from your learnings?
Good question, Stephen. I can't probably answer specifically on that, but again, I think it would be a great one to reach out to us. In fact, this might be a good one for our NCI.communications email listed at and I can put that in the chat in just a moment. But our fabulous team behind that email will help get you in touch with the right person for that question.
Okay, thank you, Kelsey. Last chance for the panel to ask a question before we go to the next speaker.
Hey, Kelsey, this is Addison Snell. How is AI changing what you're doing there, both in terms of AI complementing HPC and in terms of AI augmenting HPC?
Good questions. To probably answer from what I can most speak to from the data perspective, I think one of the biggest things that is ahead for the future is about data that is not only analysis ready, but machine actionable. And I think that's so important and is really a complex part of data management that we have to be looking forward to, like looking into the future about what type of changes we have to do for our data management at scale so that is, again, trustworthy, transparent, et cetera, so that everything, you can do bigger and better. I'd say that in a general sense is probably the biggest thing that in my area that we'll be focusing on, or we are now, but will, I'm sure, be a growing and continual area that we work in.
Great, thank you, Addison, for the question. In Europe next, so stay tuned. Kelsey, once again, thank you again for the presentation. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you all.